Good morning.
We're a little late, aren't we?
We're not. We're 1 minute late. How bad is that? Not really.
Just a little.
So, to my friend Governor Hickenlooper, this is the A-list sitting in this room, but this is also streaming to lots of people who couldn't get in this room, both here and in Colorado. So think of this audience as, you know, a million strong, maybe slight exaggeration, but all the best people are tuning in for this. I'm Jane Harmon, the president and CEO of the Wilson Center, and I've been trying for years to get my dear friend John Hickenlooper over here. And finally, a little convention occurred down the road. You may know of it. There are 18,000 people in it, and I think he had a couple of speaking gigs, and here he is. And I see so many people I know here. I can't introduce all of you, but I do see Rudy DeLeon, a former constituent of mine, but also a former Deputy Secretary of Defense, and welcome, Rudy. I'm so glad Governor Hickenlooper made time to join us today. His credentials always wow me. He has a PhD in geology. A master's in geology. Oh. He aspires to have a PhD in geology, and he's on loan to public service. He opened Colorado's first chain of brew pubs. I've actually been to them. And he started this business, sold high, and became mayor of Denver. Not many politicians, current or recovering, that would be me, can say that. And as mayor of Denver, he managed the city's budget crisis, and his poll numbers went through the roof. And for those who haven't been to Denver lately, it is a changed city. Really one of the amazing miracles of in the center of our country. He has a brand new wife named Robin, who is a powerhouse in her own right as vice president of corporate development at Liberty Media, tiny little media company, slightly bigger than the APAC conference. He's managed to navigate some of the most contentious divides in his state on energy, on the environment, and especially in a very tough re-election fight on guns. He has a talent for bridging divides. Let me repeat that, since that's not something you can say about many people in this town. He has a talent for bridging divides. And unlike many politicians, he also has a real vision for his state, a strategic view of Colorado's future, including the issue we're going to focus on today, or an issue we're going to focus on today, which is cybersecurity. He knows what it means to citizens and businesses today. He knows what the cyber threats mean in Colorado and across the country. He was the head of the National Governors Association last year. Did you become head? Oh, yes, you were. And before that, the Democratic governors. So you're no longer head of the national governors?
I'm no longer the head of any governors.
He's the recovering head of the NGA. And not that he has any new activities or plans in mind, but those who read the tea, or in Colorado's case, the marijuana leaves, know that there is a chance that he may play a bigger role on the national stage. Most especially, though, as you can obviously tell, he is my dear friend. He is a regular at the Wilson Center's annual breakfasts in Davos, and he is, as of today, a budding regular here. So please join me in welcoming Governor John Hickenlooper.
Well, thank you, Jane, for the lovely introduction, and thank you also for hosting me, but also for making sure that the Wilson Center continues to play its role in the civic life of not just the Capitol, but of the country and the world. And thank you for your service over all these years. As many of you know, if you're navigating through Washington and talking to people about national defense, security, world affairs in almost any form, Jane's name comes up again and again, and she probably gives me more of a hard time than any other individual I know, but it's always constructive, and I mean that sincerely, that it's always for my own betterment. So even when I rebel and pull away, recognize that I appreciate the efforts you put into my betterment. So
My children would say things like that.
you know, there are two types of enterprises in the world today. There are those that have been hacked and those that are going to be hacked. I mean, that pretty much covers it. Cisco estimates that by 2020, let me get this right, there will be 50 billion devices in the world. One very honest way to look at that statistic is to recognize that those individuals and enterprises that want to do us harm have increasingly a very, very target-rich environment, increasingly opportunities to either just cause harm, but also to find ways to create criminal activity at very serious, at very high levels. This is one of the places, and I came into this. Colorado has, everyone's aware that Cheyenne Mountain, NORTHCOM, North American Defense is all kind of centered down in Colorado Springs. But in 2005, the Pentagon designated Spacecom, which is originally intended to make sure that we're defended against satellite attacks, but that was going to be a priority in terms of cyber defense. And as a result of that, we have north of 65 cyber enterprises, small businesses, and some large businesses around cyber in Colorado Springs, and probably half that number up in metropolitan Denver, and really have become a kind of a central place for cyber defense. And yet, most of our citizens, when you talk to them, are completely unaware of the scale of the challenges and in any real sense what the reality of defense is, what that's going to look like. And it has been something that over the last year and a half or 2 years I've been working on. I'd probably say it's one of the 2 or 3 things I've spent the most time on, is looking at what is a realistic appraisal of the landscape, and what are we doing to accelerate our response, because it's one of those places where we're far behind where we should be given the magnitude of the threat.
Well, okay, so we agree, we buy the case here. Tell us about this new center that you've put together and how you came to the idea that putting something together like this at the state level would be an effective thing to do.
Well, one of the things I was struck by was that not just myself, but most governors, and now I've been asking mayors, most of us were woefully ill-informed in terms of the scale and the magnitude. I guess that's probably redundant, but how many different points of weakness there are, and how serious the consequences are if one of those points of weaknesses is breached. So we looked at what could we do, how do we take the assets that we have, all these small businesses and large businesses, but this ecosystem that's evolving and growing rapidly in Colorado, how do we try to put it to good use? So we've been working for the last year on creating some sort of a national center for cyber intelligence in Colorado Springs, based in Colorado Springs, but with network connections to other cities, other universities. But it would have 3 legs. One would be an institute where governors, mayors, city council members, state legislators, county commissioners could come and in a very short amount of time, let's say in a day, get realistic, pragmatic, meaningful education on what does the world of cybersecurity look like. And in their roles, again, we're not trying to teach people how to write code, but our elected officials, and I include governors, I can count on one hand the number of governors that really understand cyber and have a sense of how to allocate resources, what their role is within their states. Same with mayors, county commissioners, legislators. We want to be able to have a place where those individuals can be brought up to speed very rapidly. So that's one. And you know, part of University of Colorado at Colorado Springs already has a robust cybersecurity curriculum. They have over 20 professors that teach some form of cybersecurity. Just up the street, also in Colorado Springs, is the Air Force Academy. They are actually unveiling a new innovation center that's going to focus on cybersecurity. They do a tremendous amount of research there as well. We want to take that ecosystem and make sure that elected officials can get an education. And I can tell you, I've sat now through all manner of industry educational forums, of government educational forums. They're not where I think they need to be. And our goal here is to make something that has the, you know, the caliber of thought behind it, you know, PhD, cutting edge research thought, but also is distilled down to almost, I think of it as a, you know, a much more, not pop is the wrong word, and I'm not going to say, I wouldn't want it to be phrased as a Las Vegas approach, but we want people, when they're elected officials, to be able to come back with a lot of hooks of phrases that they can use to communicate to the other city councilmen or other county commissioners they work with their citizens about how to talk about this in real terms. And most of the way cyber is being taught to people these days is in a very intellectual, kind of just a rote number format that is not what elected officials most need. So that's one, is that. Then tied into that is this whole ecosystem of making sure that we're a cutting edge research center, and making sure that, like any good research center, there's a lot of small businesses, startup opportunities. We have the beginnings of what looks like, I think, an investment, a private investment pool that would be for the private sector to invest in small businesses, both as startups and as maybe mezzanine investments, to help accelerate ideas that come out of research into businesses, into applications. And then lastly, a rapid response center, so that a number, you know, the larger corporations, the larger industries, and large companies in those industries, they know exactly what to do. They have their own response processes and procedures. For many of those middle-sized companies, they don't know what to do when they get hacked. And we want to make sure that across industries, there's an availability of, you know, immediate rapid response. And our goal here is to create something where it's really a nonprofit with a dotted line to state government, a dotted line to federal government, but really kind of controlled by private enterprise.
Yeah, I got to say, my reaction when you told me about this a few months ago was how cool it was. I haven't heard of anything anywhere, certainly not here in Washington, that has the entrepreneurial dimension, the sort of boot camp dimension, plus the linkages that you have. Let me ask about the learning dimension. I always say that Congress is not a learning institution. Certainly applied to me, it was not a learning institution. That didn't mean I didn't try very hard to master the subjects of security and intelligence, but I basically had to go outside to do it. There was not an hour in the day where I just could sit and read things. And because it's not a learning institution, and because members and staff coast on existing intellectual inventory, we have made an effort here at the Wilson Center to do two things. One, we have what I call foreign policy school on Friday afternoons. We've taught foreign policy subjects to over 350 Hill staff, bipartisan, bicameral, over the last couple years. And now we have set up a cyber boot camp. And it is run by Meg King in the front row, who usually sits in the back under a table because she doesn't like to be recognized. But this is Meg King.
Hey, why don't you stand up just for a second?
Stand up, raise your hand. There is a Meg King. And she runs this cyber boot camp here. We've had one semester of 25 Hill staff, including members of the staffs of two of the people running for president, Bernie Sanders and Marco Rubio. And other staff as well. But the point of it is to learn just what you're talking about. What is cyber? What do cyber attacks look like? I mean, didn't we do a simulated attack so they could see it? What is a cyber lexicon? What do these terms really mean? And not only do we teach them subjects, but then they get to know each other. I know it's astounding, but staff on Capitol Hill, back in the day when I worked there, knew each other and worked together. Now staff on Capitol Hill doesn't know anybody, and they never work together. So our theory is if we can educate the staff, it'll trickle up to the members, and they'll become smarter. And I just wanted to make that little announcement for the Wilson Center. But so you have people, let's talk about the learning part, including you. I mean, how much did you know about cyber a year ago, and how much do you know now?
I would say a year ago I knew pretty much what I read in the newspapers, which is, I'd obviously read the hacking into Sony, Target, Anthem, I mean, all those, Home Depot. I'd read that stuff and I'd kind of say, well, that's kind of alarming, and I see the risk, but I really didn't have any detail. Now I would say, on a scale of 0 to 100, I've gotten to maybe 10% or 15%, but still.
That's still flunking.
It is still, it's not even flunking. It's not even to a point where you get a letter grade yet. I think that well, in terms of what I need as a governor, I'm probably, it's 70% of what I need to know now, maybe even 80%. But the field is changing so rapidly, and it is filled with, basic stuff and then much more complex stuff. And most people don't realize that, just clicking in your code on your phone, that if you're in a train station or something like that, someone can be, 100 yards away from you with an amplifier, a machine that can actually hear the difference in tone as you check in, and know how to check into your phone from then on. People don't realize that when your smartphones come, most of them are programmed so that little voice, that woman that you talk to from time to time on the phone, that you, without unlocking the phone, you can ask for contact information from that person. So what that means is someone can pick up your phone and ask for the contact information. It's not voice recognition enabled, so they can ask for the contact information of anybody in your database and get it. Comes right up on your screen. Try it at home. I mean, that stuff is the kind of basic stuff, but then you get into the larger scale of, critical infrastructure, right? Dams, the grid, medical, transportation, some of the sophisticated systems that we, depend on are in many ways very vulnerable. And I think that especially elected officials have to understand those vulnerabilities and understand what's being done about it.
Well, let's try an audience test just on the two examples you made. How many people knew that the clicks, clicking in your password could be heard, potentially heard somewhere else, and your password would be known? How many of you knew that? Well, that's pretty smart. How many of you didn't know that? Okay, the ignorant caucus is dominating here. How many of you knew about the giving Siri instructions and being able to uncover those instructions? I'm glad your chief of staff knew all this. Yeah. And Meg, of course, Meg knew. How many of you didn't know about that? Well, Wilson Center audiences are supposed to be the smartest people in the world. Some of you need some reprogramming.
They're never going to answer anymore if you keep them, exposing them.
Well, I'm exposing me. Hey, by the way, one of my old sound bites was politicians are analog and the problems are digital. And most of the laws we have crafted over years are laundry lists about what you can't do, usually, and bad guys who are digital and whose tradecraft is evolving can just program right around what you can't do, what you can do, and it's a very complex universe, as you have said. So, okay, that was the learning part, the entrepreneurial part. How's it going?
I think there's been a tremendous response pretty much everywhere I've taken this notion. People recognize the need, and that Colorado, for years, Colorado was kind of the flyover cow town, or cow state. I guess you'd say cow state. And over the last 10 or 15 years, as Jane mentioned, we've become a real magnet for millennials. Part of that's we've promoted live music. There are now more live music venues in Denver than there are in Nashville or Austin. Fact, not rumor, fact.
And more brew pubs?
We're now over 300 federally licensed breweries in the state of Colorado. That's brew pubs and microbreweries. So there's a youth culture there. There's 1,000 miles of bike trails in metropolitan Denver, all this stuff, which has attracted an amazing array of entrepreneurs. So the Kauffman Foundation measures startup activity on a per capita basis. Technology startups, I think this is a year-old information, but 4 of the top 10 startup cities in the country are in Colorado. And it's just influx of young people, and a lot of them are interested in technology, and a lot of technology interest is focused around cyber. So we're beginning to see a real, almost like a blooming of small companies around cyber, and the ecosystem right now is starved for capital. But as often happens, as those companies grow and become successful, capital is going to follow. So far, the capital around cyber is roughly, kind of in a rough justice sense, it's about 60% local, or maybe 65% local, 35% out of state. But we expect that that's going to rapidly change and become more 50-50, and ultimately 65-35 with out-of-state money, just because there's so much more of it coming into the state. Government's job is to stay out of the way, make sure that there's a lean system for how companies can start up and get going, but also to try and convene capital to places where there's a need. And cyber, I mean, again, every single week that goes by, I learn something else that makes me more concerned and gives me a greater sense of urgency around cybersecurity. One of the responses is to make sure we get more capital to these cyber companies that are starting up, because there are just so many different avenues that need to be addressed.
Well, I thought you also said there's a nonprofit piece to this. What's that?
So the nonprofit piece is setting up the institute, and it'll be the building. We have a 180,000 square foot building that used to house TRW, tops, 3-foot thick walls. You can just imagine spy versus spy in the old days doing that, trying to steal each other's secrets. But it's also perfect for working in cybersecurity. So that will house this institute that will provide education, again, focused on elected officials, because that really is the dearth. But then also for businesses that are smaller, or industries that are disaggregated, that don't have their own access to this kind of education. That'll all happen through that institute. That's all a nonprofit. And then the Rapid Response Center is an independent nonprofit that'll be really somewhat close. You could think of it almost like a trade association, but with a number of different associations that allows companies to have the access to the best and the brightest, so that when they're hacked, it's amazing. Some of the larger companies in Colorado, I asked their CEOs, so what happens if you get hacked deeply? Who do you call? And in over half the cases, the CEOs go, we don't have someone to call. We go to our vendor, who our primary vendor for our software, but in many cases they have several vendors. Their software integrates in terms of what they need done, and they're not wild about having, private companies, even consulting firms, come in and see their most valuable intellectual property. So this Rapid Response Center is envisioned as a kind of an independent, safe haven, and ultimately we would love the larger companies that do have, top-notch cyber talent on staff to, every 5 years have someone almost go as a fellowship and spend 2 months or 3 months at this intelligence center and learn the latest of what's going on, but also share their information, what they know, so that you have a constant. I mean, one of the biggest challenges with any of these rapidly changing technology challenges is to make sure that you're getting fresh information whatever your response is. You've got to make sure that there's constant refreshing and churning of information, so people understand the latest of what's happening.
What's so refreshing is that so much of your language is from the private sector. As an entrepreneur, which you were, very few people in this town talk like this. Refreshing something? Really? I don't think so. But Congress took about 5 years to pass a law that did pass last year, I think, which basically creates in the Department of Homeland Security, a department that I have great respect for, and you said you just spent some time, I think, with Ali Mayorkas, who's the deputy there, a very capable deputy. Jay Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland, is over here all the time, gives his state of the Homeland Department here. He just did his third one every year. But at any rate, it took years to get Congress to agree that the private sector should share information with DOD, with DHS on hacks and experiences. There was an issue about liability of doing this, but now there is no liability. The private sector was mistrustful of DHS. Now they're working together, and I'm looking at Meg. It just started, but it's light years behind what you're talking about. I mean, you know, there's obviously more innovation. No insulting Ali and Jay, but a lot more innovation at the state level, or at least in terms of what you're trying to do.
I think Ali Mayorkas, who's the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, he gets it, and he is aggressively reaching out. I mean, his travel schedule, he was describing to me, you know, all the places he's going and how they're looking at, you know, their funding. And his, I mean, he uses the word innovation, you know, every other paragraph. There's a focus on innovation. So I think they're getting it. And I think, I felt that they were moving very strongly in the right direction, but they need partners in states. In other words, it's not all going to happen in Washington. They need different states to set up. You know, ultimately, I think we'll probably have 5 or 6 centers like this in various cities that'll have different focuses. In other words, I think our focus is going to be on critical infrastructure, some of those public assets, dams, and railroads, the grid, things like that, because that is a whole separate universe. But we're also going to, again, have a rapid response center for industries and have the other applications as well.
So I have 2 more questions. Get ready with your questions. One is, you mentioned grids that are vulnerable. Have grids in Colorado been hacked, and what resources do you have to protect the big grids that deliver essential services or whatever to people in Colorado?
So I think the big grids are in pretty good shape. They do have the resources to build in a lot of, let's just call it defense. And if you were to talk to anybody, and I have talked to a bunch of people in the grid business, right? There's not one that's not concerned about it, and there's not one that doesn't think they need to be doing more, and they do have a great sense of urgency. But keep in mind that our grids are all interconnected, and that one of the realities of cybersecurity is the weakest link is where someone who wants to do evil, as is said in Washington from time to time, but that's where that weakest link is going to attract the attacks. And oftentimes, very often, that weakest link is a person, not software, and often it's a person in a smaller enterprise rather than the large utility. And so I think that's what people are focusing on now, is looking at where are those weakest links in the grid. We have people trying to hack every day at every level. The level of people poking and prodding into the various technology systems is amazing to me. That in the state of Colorado, if you include all our universities and everything, we have 8 million events a day. Now, an event can be someone just putting in the wrong password, but it's hard to tell just immediately whether that's someone just putting in the wrong password, now they're going to go back in, or whether that's someone really trying to root around and trying to find a way to get into your system. So that level of all that activity before there's even a penetration into the security, it's got to be concerning for anybody.
Well, asymmetry is this modus operandi. It's also the modus operandi for terrorists. They look for our weakest link, and we can't protect 100% of everything 100% of the time. So you really have to manage against risk. And it sounds like, if you're sophisticated the way you are in Colorado, that you minimize the risk. There won't be no hacks, but you minimize the risk of big hacks or very damaging hacks.
Well, I think that is part of the way thought is evolving, is that to say you're going to eliminate all hacking, all hacks, is impossible. So the question now is, what's the, how fast can you find out if you've been hacked? How long does it take? I mean, some of the statistics on this, I mean, the average penetration through security is, I forget what it is, 4.5 months or 5 months before it's discovered. That's a staggering statistic, right? So we've got to do a much better job of being able to recognize when a system has been penetrated, when there has been a breach, and then get on it, because that damage can happen literally at any moment.
Right. And my last question, and Meg, I'm warning you, you're going to say 3 sentences more about cyber boot camp, because I left out all kinds of goodies. And then we'll open it to questions. My last question is about a guy named Tim Cook. You've probably heard of him. He's on the cover of Time magazine. He's taken a pretty controversial position, and he and the FBI are now in litigation. What is your view on the encryption fight, and whether there should be some demand that Apple and other device makers find a way that may mean inventing new code to let the FBI with valid warrants see information on specific people?
Oh, that's that is the question of the day. I heard actually Admiral Mike Rogers speak on. I'm sure he's been here. I'm sure he's been here many times, of course. And I'll paraphrase, because I think he said it. I mean, I felt from his response, I felt kind of proud that that's what our country's military leaders, the positions that they're taking. And he really laid it out as, this is one of the great dynamic tensions in our country's history, and is going to continue to be so. Our Constitution, right there in the beginning, it talks about the people's freedom, right? And their freedom to think, to read whatever book they want, to say whatever they want, all of our freedoms. But then you go deeper in the Constitution, and it talks about our government's obligation to protect people and make sure that we keep our people safe. And the balance of how do we decide what role government can take in getting in the middle of our communicating with each other to keep us safe, how far that they can go. And we've been allowing judges to decide wiretaps, listening in to someone's private conversations for decades. And I think Tim Cook's point that under no circumstances can we ever give up this access, it's probably a little excessive. At the same time, as we navigate, at what point we allow this communication to be shared, we have to be very, very mindful that our culture is based on this freedom of thought, this freedom of expression, all the freedoms that are contained there and around that basic notion.
Well, I would argue to that security and liberty are not a zero-sum game. They're not. It's not a balance. You don't get more of one and less of the other. We really have to figure out the way to make this a positive-sum game, or else it will be a negative-sum game. We have to have both at some level, and you heard me say valid warrants, with specified individual names and all of this stuff. And I think the fight has to be at that level. And it's it's complicated, as they say. It's all very complicated, and I hope we find a way forward. It depresses me that Congress hasn't taken up the challenge to at least debate this subject. Congress hasn't done anything unless I missed it, about a lot of things, but including this: no hearings, no real careful thought, because the hearings bring in the public. No public debate in a structured way on this. Okay, questions? Please identify yourselves. Yes, sir. Wait for a microphone, or we can use this one. I know.
My name is Tom Mansback, and
a member of the Wilson Cabinet.
Member of the Wilson.
Thank you very much.
Council, for which I am most grateful. Thank you. Very interesting place, and I recommend it to everybody.
I didn't plant that question.
I know. I'm a junkie, so the answer to your question is that line will be decided by whoever takes Scalia's place in the long run. My question has to do with the,
Whenever that might be.
don't get me started. My question is the relationship of, I mean, there must be an incubator attached to your institute and so forth. And what are the plans for ownership of intellectual property developed in the incubator as to who ends up with the intellectual property? Is it owned by the individuals who are incubating their projects there, or the institute, or some predetermined percentage, as is often done in medical research and things of that nature?
Yeah, so I think we are moving towards the predetermined percentage. Biotech research is, and again, the percentages vary widely, but most of the successful incubators have some way of generating revenue for the perpetuation, so you don't keep having to take public money. The goal is that they become self-sustaining. So we don't want it to ever make a profit, but ideally we would like the incubator to be able to pay for the building and its, the maintenance and the management of it through revenues generated by successful, one out of whatever it is, one out of several hundred is going to go up and be gigantic. And we'd like the value to be sufficient that it can pay for the upkeep of the incubator itself.
Other questions? In the back on the corner. Yes.
Thank you. It's rare to get the back corner question addressed, so I appreciate that. My name is Greg Shuckman, Governor. I'm with the University of Central Florida, and you mentioned the universities involved in the institute. Can you talk about who's involved? Is there a lead institution? Is there competition between the universities? Because everybody has a cyber program, including the community colleges now. If you could talk about that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So first, there is a lead organization. The University of Colorado has a number of different branches, like most state universities now. The University of Colorado at Colorado Springs is the lead university involved. But we fully, because there are so many schools just in Colorado School of Mines, the Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado State University in Pueblo, that all have strong cyber programs, University of Colorado in Denver. So we want them to all connect, but I think the real magic is creating a network between all those universities in other cities that have their own cyber specialties and focuses. Ultimately, let's assume that there are 6 or even 8 or 10 of these centers in different cities around the country 20 years from now. We want to have as much connection between what's going on in one city with one local ecosystem of professors as is going on in another. So, the Carnegie Mellon is a good example. That there's a university that's got a lot going on in cyber and has a lot of connections to University of Colorado at Colorado Springs and a number of different universities. Part of our goal in this is to try and create a template by which we have more lines of connections and work with more different universities as much as possible. And I think history shows us that when you're working on large projects that are complex and challenging, the more different, the more efficiently you're able to get different research and different expertise connected into the root work, the root source of, really trying to find the source of solutions, the faster you get to those solutions. So we're very mindful that this is not just going to be Colorado universities, that we're going to want to reach out to Florida, to, go down the list, Georgia, California, Texas. San Antonio's got a lot going on. We want to make sure that we get to connect as much as we can, useful information.
Is there a director of this whole project?
We're doing the search right now, so we have an RFP. If someone's
how many people want to be the director?
Right, someone's looking for gainful employment, and you have the right background. You like starting things and thinking big. Come on out.
There we go. Other questions? Yes, in the front. Just wait.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gwendolyn Beck. I'm a gerontologist, and I also have a strong financial background. And I'm wondering about the seniors, because there is the evildoers, let's call them that, prey on the seniors through their computers, and there's a lot of financial fraud, and I'm just curious about what Colorado is doing about it, and if there's any sort of incubator or new companies that you see.
So we are very aware. I think every governor, this is something we are all aware of and worry about, because there are, I mean, historically, when it was just telephone fraud, there was a lot of effort made to focus on seniors, and depending on the age and condition, situation of a senior, they have varying levels of vulnerability, but sometimes very high. This magnifies all that off the scale. And a lot, I mean, there are, and I was, we did a kind of around the world tour in October. So we were in Japan, in China, spent a few days in Israel. But we looked in each place. We tried to find out everything we could about what was going on in cyber activities, and to hear stories about, these workshops, right? Rooms where you've got 50 young people that are all full-time. They come to work every day. They wake up, they have a cup of coffee, they read the newspaper, and then they go to work, and they start hacking. And there are a number of them that are focused, on how do we find seniors with resources that, have a low level of dementia, so that they still have control of their activities, but they are vulnerable. This is not I'm not speaking about something that hasn't been thought of or discussed. This is a reality. So we on the state level have a bunch of protections we're trying to create, but our Center of Cyber Intelligence, it doesn't exist yet, but hopefully that will be a focus of it, because it is one of the vulnerabilities of the country that is very real.
Yep. Very good question. Let's see, we'll do this side. You, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. This is Alan Sessom from Georgetown University. We've seen each other a number of times. One of the biggest problems in cybersecurity is it's not anticipatory. It's reactive. And the biggest vulnerability, as in conventional spying, is human. What are the thoughts being given to dealing with the human dimension? Because anybody can be hacked. Because people are just going to screw up in general. How is that managed?
Not the governor of Colorado.
Me more than most. And that is ultimately the question that so much of cybersecurity, so many of the experts come back to, and that cybersecurity itself kind of revolves back to, is how do you diminish as much as possible that window by which human error or human weakness can be utilized to harm us. And obviously our friends at Carnegie Mellon, they're so far down on the artificial intelligence. The answer is, 3 or 4 years we won't need us anymore. So then we won't have such a work. It depends on the system. And again, this is beyond. Now you're getting into that part where I don't fully understand how to diminish. Obviously, and you could probably, I should make you answer your own question, because I suspect but the stuff we're working towards and talking about is having, multiple people involved in all kinds of accesses, and yet still without gumming things up and making things too hard, so that for certain types of breaches, or where our software is trained to suspect that this isn't quite fits the pattern of normal behavior, that then you have to have a different human being get involved in that a different human is alerted and say, hey, is this really what you meant? Some of the impersonation, right? So that your CFO sends you an email saying, hey, we arranged that we're going to send $2.5 million to this bank in San Diego. Can you make sure it gets through? I'm going to be out of town for a week. And it comes in, it looks exactly like their email and everything. How do you make sure that also gets copied to somebody else, so that there are two people that see that, and that it has to go back, that you have to ask for authentication, right? Really? Is this really what you mean? And you send an email, you don't hit just reply, but you send a separate email back to that person you're trying to get. That kind of stuff. But I still don't, to be blunt, this is one of the things that's the most concerning, is that what do you do about that individual who is, done something wrong that they don't want anyone to know about, is being held hostage, basically, that they're being blackmailed into doing something that we couldn't imagine they do. And as you say, it's traditional espionage. It's the same. It's the way it's always been to a certain extent.
Anybody in the far back of the room that I can't see want to ask a question?
You can tell she's a Democrat because she really does try to make sure that all parts of the room are
do.
included
I
and
do.
part of the discussion.
Yes, there's somebody with 2 fingers up. There he is. That's right.
Thank you. I'm Steve Sullivan, Department of Commerce. I'm curious to know, your center sounds great, really interesting. And I'm sort of getting up to speed a little on cyber because I support the North American Competitiveness Work Plan, and cybersecurity is one of the components of that. And so I'd be interested to hear if you're doing any work with NIST or EDA on the center, and also if you're doing any work with Canada and Mexico.
Yes, so in terms of Canada and Mexico, first, one of the things we talked about, we had not this last fall, but this last fall. Was it? Yeah, it was just this last fall. My God, time, it's like dog years when you're a governor. It's hard to keep track one fall from the other. But we've had the first, what we called North American Summit. So we invited all the governors from all the states of Mexico, all the premiers from Canada, all the governors from the United States. And I think we had 20 governors and premiers all there. And one of the things we talked about was cyber and what does that look like, cyber crime look like across borders, and how can we do a better job of interconnecting? And it was a very fruitful discussion. So I think that there's work going forward there with the National Governors Association. They have similar associations both in Mexico and Canada, and we recognize that this is, again, a universal issue. More importantly, I think, is how do the federal governments work together, and certainly all 3 of those governments could do a better job of integrating this. In terms of NIST, and I mean, right now there is no national standards around cybersecurity. So one of the things we proposed to the Department of Commerce, and I met with Secretary Pritzker a couple of months ago, was that we put this in Colorado Springs. I think, again, center of the country, with SpaceCom already a kind of a center of advancing thought, and Colorado has a bunch of OSHA, or the National Oceanic and Oceanic and Atmospheric Aeronautical. You get enough aerospace industry, you have a hard time getting back to the appropriate language. But we have renewable energy labs. We have about 29 federal institutions like that, and I think it would fit in well within that context. So, but clearly that is Commerce is going to be involved in this, and has to be involved as we take this idea of a state-located national center forward.
Okay, over there in the red tie.
Thanks, Governor. Sam Fletcher with Congressman Lamborn, who represents Colorado Springs, and very excited for this new initiative. Obviously, I'm curious, the subtitle of this event is "It's the State's Stupid," and I'm curious if you could just build out a little more.
I'm the one who came up with that creative title.
It's excellent.
Doesn't mean states are stupid, but
No, it's
but maybe I won't finish the sentence.
well, maybe states are stupid sometimes, but I think what what Jane was referring to is that states really are the laboratory of democracy, and that and cut me off if I'm getting out on a limb, but I think we need, again, that's why I'm saying not just Colorado Springs, but we probably need 6 or 8 of these centers competing with each other and trying to have a different focus, and at the same time working with each other. And I think the National Governors Association is a great model. Last year when I was the chair, I made a chart of all the best practices, the new ideas that one governor or another governor has, and they love, to my knowledge, every governor loves having their best ideas stolen and copied. It's a compliment, and yet we still compete relentlessly. And The incoming this summer, Terry McAuliffe will be the new chair of the National Governors Association, and I think there's a high probability that he's going to make cyber each year a governor can pick a field or a space in which to try and create an impact. And I think it's a good high probability that it'll be for the National Governors Association under Governor McAuliffe. It'll be cyber, which again I think will be good for the country.
Can I ask just a brief follow-up to that?
Go ahead.
So is there, I guess it sounds like you're already working to try to cooperate with and align with some of the federal initiatives on cybersecurity, and as you both have talked about, the federal government has really struggled to try to respond quickly enough to some of these things. But how is this new center aligned with, for example, some similar sounding centers within DHS, or more recently the DNI, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, and what's kind of the unique role, and where do you see opportunities for kind of cooperation and alignment there?
Well, I think the federal government's doing everything it can. I think those centers are important, but they are, historically, and we'll see, because I think in some senses they are being set up in unique ways compared to the way the federal government has worked in the past. But historically, states have been more agile and been able to evolve and transform their initiatives more rapidly and have them evolve to fit the needs in real time. And I think that having a center like we're imagining in Colorado Springs is going to help those federal centers. And obviously, we are talking to each of them. We're going to make sure that we're hand in glove, working together with them. But our hope is that we'll be able to actually help them and provide in real time, more rapidly, different ways of thinking about and how to organize ourselves around this issue.
There's another factor, too, which is that the toxic partisanship that has infected this town doesn't operate at the state level in most states. And imagine this: governors of different parties work together, and they think their job assignment is solving problems. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, so Governor Herbert in Utah, he and I, we'll talk every month or two, and certainly on cyber. We're doing a lot of work right now around totally rethinking our workforce and beginning to look at apprenticeships. So kids, when they're 16, they can, if they're not feeling comfortable in school and they know they're not going to go to college, can't they go to work for 3 days a week and then spend 2 days getting a different curriculum, but learning at a workforce training center, at a community college, at a university, whatever they want, but accumulate badges and certificates and different things, and be able, how can we track that and make sure that they have a living resume that kind of follows them along? That kind of stuff, governors come up with that, and then we share it with other governors, and the other governors help, the best ideas I've ever had in my life were such good ideas, and I would think about them for months. And the moment I shared that idea with somebody else who was pretty smart, it became better literally in 20 minutes, because they always think of things you don't think about. No matter how much time you spend thinking about it, we each have our own little narrow pie shape of experiences. Once you bring other people involved, and get them involved in what you're working on, it gets better very rapidly, and governors get that.
And I know you've been working, for example, with Zoe Baird at the Markle Foundation about the future of work. And if we don't all think forward about how work will change, I think we're going to end up in a non-competitive position, in addition to fueling the anger that we're seeing in both political parties, because they don't see a future that's better than the present that they live. So we have time for one more question. Then I'm calling on Meg because I forgot her. There's a woman in the middle in a striped sweater, right there.
Hi, I'm Kristen Solheim with Citigroup. I'm just wondering if you see a role for the private sector at your center.
So, a huge role, and banking is a classic. The banking industry has a lot of. You guys have already done. The banking industry are leaders in cybersecurity. At the same time, you're growing rapidly, moving in different directions, evolving in a way that, banking really is connected to every other industry as well, so that your vulnerabilities are probably more complex than just about anybody's. And our sense is that you have to be at the table, right? And so we view that the National Banking Association, we've talked to the Colorado Banking Association to make sure that, you know, how are we setting this up in such a way that welcomes that kind of private sector involvement? And that rapid response center, part of that goal is to make sure that all industries are connected there, and that they are all, that there's a facility, an ability to integrate all the different approaches that are going on in different industries. Because it's I'm sure your bankers are probably more aware of this than anybody, but different industries are looking at this from very different perspectives. In some ways exactly the same, in some ways very, very different. And those industries that connect so many different places, so banking, insurance is another one, healthcare, we've got to make sure that you guys are at the table. So we're certainly very aware of that. And hopefully, you know, the large banking organizations, we know how profitable you are and that you have a true civic devotion. And we're certainly hopeful that you'll help fund this.
You can also contribute to the Wilson Center if you choose. So Meg, what are we doing here that's so special and that Governor Hickenlooper and this entire A+ audience needs to know about?
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for being here, Governor. The Wilson Center Cybersecurity Lab developed because we had many Hill staff coming to us looking for resources about how to learn about some of these tricky technology issues. They're smart people, they just didn't have the right resources. And so we developed a 6-week curriculum starting with the backbone of the technology, the backbone of the internet, all the way through bad actors and through the international law and privacy components. We've had great success in the first session. We've got, what we did is we have
The first semester, we've done a whole 6-week course, right?
Right. In the first session, we have 3 each year. And what we've learned is that we've raised the level of kind of the whole group on this issue, but we've also learned what areas in which we need to dive deeper. And we continue to do that. It's a regular conversation. And what's come up is that we've got some interest from the state and local level, as well as international legislative staff. So we're looking into how to expand the program that way.
So could we take people from Colorado
Absolutely.
who need to be smarter? They have to be as smart as their governor? Could we take
Absolutely.
those people?
Yes, we would love to take
Or
those.
maybe they have to be smarter than their governor.
One
Yeah.
would hope.
Anything, so we're diving deeper on what subjects?
Everything from encryption to attribution to how do terror groups think about these issues and what's on the horizon in the next 5 to 10 years. What data protection issues will Congress need to be thinking about? So everything from the agenda to threats.
Okay, so now I hope you're all smarter than when you came in, and certainly I'm smarter than when I came in. It was a low bar. But John Hickenlooper, this is your first speaking, no, is it? Yes, your first speaking gig at the Wilson Center? I know you were at one of our dinners, but you haven't.
I've been in the audience, but this is my first speaking at the Wilson Center.
How many of you agree with me that he did a great job? Thank you very much.
Thank you.